when you have these slow hunches, the number one thing to do with them is just to remember them in some form. Just capture them and somehow store them in a format, however you do it, with pen and paper or with an advanced language model, such that when you stumble across something else 6 months later or 3 years later or 20 years later that builds on that initial spark, that initial hunch, you have access to it, because the hunch is the easiest thing to forget because it's not fully baked. It doesn't work. My hypercard project ultimately didn't really work. And if I just said, well, that was a failure, let's move on and do something else, I would have so much would have been lost in my career but because I kind of kept that idea alive, it ended up turning into something useful.
There's an idea here that feels very important to me, which is implementing this approach of capturing sparks and fragments such that they can, combine and recombine and grow, has a lot to do with tooling. And I think a lot of what we'll talk about is the evolution of that tooling, and how it's grown over the years. But I've personally found that a real challenge is fragmentation and the challenge of like consistency versus little bits of things getting lots of different places, and then you have nothing instead of everything.
Yeah.
And you seem to have managed to work through that. And I also, not to skip ahead too much, I think today there are some new tools that might help us solve that problem.
Yeah.
But I've really found that to be a problem over the years as someone who's actively tried to implement this strategy, but it's just not that easy.
Yeah, I think that they're kind of in the world of people who are interested in this kind of commonplace book to Spark file to kind of notes, personal knowledge management, uh, field. They're kind of two schools, and one school is spend as little time organizing it as possible. Just capture everything. Because if there's any friction of like, but now I must classify this note according to my taxonomy that I have meticulously developed, like it eventually won't happen. And by classifying and putting everything in its right folder, you miss the surprising connections that you might otherwise make when two things that seem unrelated end up connecting. Now, and then there's another camp that's like, no, I really like to build my system and I like to classify everything and put it in the right place. And that's how I think. And I think those approaches, probably are valid for different kinds of minds, and different kinds of, kind of education or training or whatever. You kind of get to the brain you occupy as an adult, and you think a certain way and you organize your ideas a certain way, and that's fine. I have always been on the camp of, I don't want to spend any time organizing. Yeah, I just am I've always had kind of messy desks, and I just prefer to not organize it. I have a good memory. I have a maybe slightly larger than average like context window, and so that may be a little bit of a help for me, and that I'm able to kind of just be like, oh, as long as I've captured it, I'll remember it, and I don't need to organize it. And I think maybe some other folks, so that maybe just be a bias on my end. But that is kind of the tension, and the problem has been historically that if you don't organize on the most basic level, if you don't either have folders or tags, right, like things are disorganized, and now it's possible with some tools to get around that.
I want to talk. Let's save that question, because I think that is a key question. But I'll also just add that even without getting into the organize or don't organize debate, like there's I don't know, I've used 10 different notes apps over the last 10 years for whatever reason. I've got stuff in Google Docs, I've got stuff in this notes app and that's notes app, and some of them are more organized and less. And not to mention notebooks. And so I think like even just being consistent with a simple system is a real challenge, or has been for me. And I also feel like maybe in the adjacent possible of now, that's a problem that we might.
Yeah. And we should mention here, just connected to the commonplace book idea, is the other important thing in this is like capturing other people's ideas, right? So the beautiful thing about, I didn't kind of come across the commonplace book as a concept until I think I was writing my book, The Invention of Air, about Joseph Priestley, the 18th century chemist, and his relationship with Ben Franklin, and that the commonplace book was like the productivity hack of the Enlightenment, basically. Like there were kind of these like self-help productivity books that were written at the time, like here's my special commonplace book indexing method that you can,
Yep.
and
Wow.
if they'd had TED Talks, they would have been talking about that at the coffee shops in London. So so they um so the idea of the commonplace book was like, it was as much about other people's ideas as it was about your own. And as you read,
Right.
you were supposed to transcribe, like write down the ideas of other people when you had, stumbled across an interesting passage. And the beautiful thing about that idea is this concept that like your own thinking is the combination of all these other ideas that sat in other people's heads, that
Yes.
you've stitched together this unique constellation, which is a complete mixed metaphor, but stick with me here. um,
Yeah.
that is not your own ideas. It's a network of lots of other people's ideas plus the ideas that you've added to the mix. And a commonplace book was a mechanism of like building your own, kind of worldview piece by piece from other people's ideas. And that's it. So as well as capturing your hunches, it's like capturing the other things that inspire you, because you never know how those are going to apply down the line.
Notebook plus scrapbook,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
basically.
yeah, yeah.